hello everybody. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome you to the second installment of the Isakson Symposium on Political Civility. My name is Matthew Auer. I'm the Dean of the School of Public and International Affairs here at UGA. So this symposium is based on
this radical premise that in the world of politics, person A expects that person B will be honorable and will respect the views and the opinions and goals of person A, and vice versa. It's that simple. But this idea actually hasn't really stuck with some folks, and so for that reason we're going to take this show on the road. Next fall we're going to do this in Washington, D.C. But I think everyone here gets that, right? You learn it in K through 12 or in church or the mosque or in temple. Nevertheless, we think that it's really important, and we think that the exemplar of that ethos is former U.S. Senator from Georgia, Johnny Isakson. Johnny Isakson was somebody who lived this principle of political civility and honoring the person that you're engaging with, because he was a problem solver and he was a deal maker. We realized a few years ago in conversation with some of his closest allies and proteges, including 3 different chiefs of staff who are our partners, and I think you'll meet some of them this afternoon, that this work is vital. We have to absolutely instill it in our students. We have to do research on it. We have to have students doing internships in this space, and we need to have this symposium. And at this symposium, our intention here is to bring exemplars, people who are in the Isakson style of bridge building, of bipartisanship, and of political civility. So I'm thrilled for this installment of our engagement. So in your programs, I think that you'll see the backing of our founders for this program and for the broader Isakson Legacy Fund. This is one element of the Legacy Fund. Not only will we ultimately have not just the symposium going forward, but we expect faculty will have opportunities to do research. Students will do internships in this space. And it's a place for us to develop in the classroom instruction. When it's fully funded, and we're getting into being about halfway there, we're over the $1 million mark. That's thanks to many people in this room, and it's certainly thanks to folks that you see mentioned in the program. I also want to thank our corporate sponsors for today's event. So with that, among the different chiefs of staff over the years with Senator Isakson was a certain Attorney General, present Attorney General Chris Carr. And I'm delighted to introduce Chris Carr to you. I was just thinking this morning, well, he's been at this job for a few years. Actually, it's been almost 10 years that he has, as you will see on his website, his work revolves around defending the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution of the state of Georgia. He does that very well. And so with that, I'd ask you to welcome Chris Carr to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm incredibly proud to be here today as we honor the life and the legacy of my former boss, friend, and mentor, Senator Johnny Isakson, and his brand of civility that was so successful and is so very missed and is so very needed in politics today. So, Dean, thank you so much for your partnership. Thanks for all you're doing, President Moorhead, the entire team here at UGA. Thank you for your continued support of the Johnny Isakson Legacy Fund. Those of you all know, Johnny was a dyed-in-the-wool Georgia Bulldog. He bled red and black. And I know that he is so proud to have his name affiliated with the flagship institution of our state, his alma mater, to highlight the importance of bipartisanship and reaching across the aisle. I also want to thank former U.S. Senators Heidi Heitkamp and Saxby Chambliss for being here with us today to highlight that same bipartisan work that's benefited our country for generations and will continue to benefit for generations to come. through the Isakson Initiative. Johnny exemplified everything that you'd want in a public servant, and he was one of the greatest George ever had. He was the first person that I voted for when I was 18 years old, and he was the first person I worked for in politics. He became a mentor and a close friend to both me and my wife, Joan, who also served as Chief of Staff to Senator Isakson. In fact, when Joan and I got married in 2016, Johnny said, so you see, Carr, I'm a pretty good senator, but I'm a great matchmaker. Being so close to Johnny for so many years, I saw firsthand Johnny's willingness to bridge the gap. He worked with others to find common ground. He respected people, whether they were a senator or a congressman or a staffer or the doorkeeper at the Capitol. He valued relationships, whether it was in business at Northside Realty or in politics. In delivering his farewell address on December 3rd, 2019, Senator Isakson said, "I never saw people get things done by not agreeing with each other. You have to come to an agreement. I made a living selling houses. You can't ever solve a problem if you have two people and they will not agree to a price or a time to move. You have to find common ground. It's the same thing with the law. You can't pass a law. You can't solve a problem. If you are one of those people who say, it's my way or the highway, then we're all in real trouble." Johnny knew that there were two kinds of politicians, those who were constructive and those who are destructive. Those who are looking to lift and build up, and those who are always trying to tear down. He was always constructive, finding a way to work together to improve the lives of our fellow Georgians, our fellow Americans, and our veterans in particular. He firmly believed that compromise was not a bad word. He knew that half a loaf had to be better than no loaf at all. And even when the Senate or the country seemed so divided, when it felt as if there was no way to possibly see eye to eye with those on the other side of the aisle, that's when Johnny thrived. That's when he employed his personal motto that there's only two kinds of people in the world, friends and future friends. Johnny really lived by that motto, and it helped him achieve results at times when no one else could. I'll be forever grateful that Senator Isakson was willing to take a chance on me back in 2004. And whenever I'm confronted with a tough decision, I often ask myself, WWJD, what would Johnny do? He would treat everyone as a friend or a future friend, and I hope we are all willing to do the same. Now, it is my great honor to introduce our next speaker, my friend and a tremendous leader not only in our state but in higher education, UGA President Jerry Moorhead. I met President Moorhead in 1993 when I took his business and the law class. He became a mentor to me, and he has been a close friend for the past 30 years. His impact on this university cannot be overstated. Record fundraising, a student-focused vision, working with Governor Brian Kemp, the General Assembly, and our Board of Regents to create the state's second public medical school, firmly establishing UGA as one of the premier public universities in our nation, and not one, but 2 national championships. So please join me in welcoming the best university president serving in America today, Jerry Moorhead.
Well, thank you, Chris. I don't know really what I say after an introduction like that, except to thank you for not only being an extraordinary graduate of the University of Georgia, but for the exemplary service that you are providing our state and nation as our Attorney General. Thank you so much. It is certainly my honor to be with all of you today for the 2nd annual Johnny Isakson Symposium on Political Civility. And when you look at this packed room, I hope that the Isakson family realizes what a tremendous impact your generosity and the generosity of others has had on creating this legacy to honor Senator Isakson's incredible service to this state and to this country. Like so many that will come up here today, he was a great mentor to me and a great example of what a public servant is supposed to be. Someone, as Chris Carr pointed out, is always looking for the opportunity to work together for the public good and for bringing us all together. As a public research university, this is the kind of event that we are so honored to be a part of. And we're also honored to have so many UGA alumni involved in this event, including 2 program participants today. We're certainly honored to have former Senator Heidi Heitkamp from the great state of North Dakota with us, and former U.S. Senator and UGA alumnus Saxby Chambliss from the state of Georgia as this year's panelists. And I want to thank both of you for sharing your valuable time with this audience today. And I'm also pleased to welcome back to campus ABC News correspondent, co-host of 2020, and UGA's 2019 commencement speaker, alumna Deborah Roberts, who is serving as the moderator. Please join me in thanking all 3 of these individuals. We are so grateful to have members of the Isakson family with us today, particularly the late Senator's wife, Diane, his children, John, Kevin, and Julie, his brother, Andy, as well as so many former colleagues from the Georgia General Assembly. Please join me in welcoming all these individuals. Now it's my pleasure to welcome another former student and UGA graduate, Mr. Heath Garrett, who served as Chief of Staff and Political Strategist to Senator Isakson, to the podium. Heath?
Thank you, President Moorhead. What a great privilege and honor it was to matriculate to the University of Georgia 36 years ago. It's hard to believe. But President Moorhead is a professor and his administrator, and also President Charles Knapp, who I know is in the audience today, were probably the first 2 people to introduce me to the concept of political civility. As a young man coming out of Albany, Georgia, full of all the energy of wanting to engage in partisan politics, these 2 gentlemen took interest in students that they didn't have to take interest in. And I think that ethos still continues to this day because of great leaders in the past. Most importantly, they both had a hand in introducing me 35 years ago, last month, to a young man named Johnny Isakson at an alumni event. And for all the students in the room, it's a great example. When you have the opportunity, take it. Because I got to know Johnny Isakson. I volunteered on a campaign. I did the grunt work. And a few years later, I went to work for him, and now I've been working for Johnny Isakson for the last 35 years of my life, and what a labor of love it has been. It has been. It is both fitting and appropriate that we gather here today in this time of seemingly exhaustive political division to honor the life and the legacy of Johnny Isakson. Who was Johnny Isakson? Let's not forget, Johnny was a successful businessman, helping build Northside Realty into the largest independent real estate firm in the Southeast as a businessman first, building that business. He then went on to become the only Georgian in our history to serve in the State House of Representatives, the State Senate, the U.S. House of Representatives, and the United States Senate. When you study what Socrates thought should be the model citizen legislator, it's Johnny Isakson. He gave it his family, he built a business, and he also found time to serve. At a young age, he learned from his parents a couple of extremely important quotes that I know many of the children will remember today. His father taught him, son, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I can hear him now driving along some country road in South Georgia, where I'm from. And he said to me one day, he goes, "Heath, you know what the definition of luck is, don't you? It's when preparation meets opportunity." And Johnny Isakson's life exemplified that. He didn't win every race, but he kept working hard. He kept working hard for the people and for his business. Now, as a freshman here at the University of Georgia and a young member of the Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity, when Johnny Isakson wasn't at Bible study or in the library, he had to memorize a poem under what we called back then constructive hazing. But I want to read for you, what I want to read for you is a poem that hung, he learned it as a freshman, and apparently he could say it to a match. But this poem was so important to him that he hung it above his desk for most of his adult life. And I'll read it to you today. "The true gentleman is the man whose conduct proceeds from goodwill and an acute sense of propriety, and whose self-control is equal to all emergencies, who does not make the poor man conscious of his poverty, the obscure man of his obscurity, or any person of his inferiority or deformity, who is himself humbled if necessity compels him to humble another, who does not flatter wealth, cringe before power, or boast of his own possessions or achievements, who speaks with frankness but always with sincerity and sympathy, whose deed follows his word, who thinks of the rights and feelings of others rather than his own, and who appears well in any company, a man with whom honor is sacred and virtue safe." I don't think any greater words describe Johnny Isakson than that. Johnny took this poem and it infused his soul and guided his life as a husband, a father, a grandfather, a businessman, and as a public servant. If Johnny were here with us today at this exact time, I have no doubt that he would quote one of his favorite quotes from Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural. "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our soul." Johnny based his most famous quote, "There are only two types of people in this world, friends and future friends," on the scripture where it tells us to love your enemies, and on this quote from Abraham Lincoln. Now it is up to all of us in this room to honor his life and legacy by rededicating ourselves to these great virtues, so that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish. Thank you very much.
Well, it's now my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guests of honor. After introducing our guests, I ask them to take the stage for today's discussion. Senator Heidi Heitkamp served as the first female senator elected from North Dakota from 2013 to 2019. During her 6 years in the U.S. Senate, Senator Heitkamp prioritized improving the lives of indigenous people and working families, stopping human trafficking, guaranteeing affordable health care, addressing childhood trauma, eliminating unnecessary regulation, and securing an energy policy that keeps costs low but achieves climate goals. Providing equal economic opportunity to rural America continues to be her lifelong pursuit. Senator Heitkamp previously served as North Dakota's Attorney General and State Tax Commissioner. She serves on numerous boards, including the McCain Institute, the Howard Buffett Foundation, Restore Democracy Initiative, and the German Marshall Fund. She's the founder and chair of the One Country Project, an organization focused on addressing the needs and concerns of rural America. Senator Heitkamp is the director of the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. She serves as a contributor to both CNBC and ABC News. Welcome. Senator Saxby Chambliss served in the U.S. Senate for 2 terms, and before that served 4 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. During his tenure in the Senate, Senator Chambliss served as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, the Senate Rules Committee, and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Senator Chambliss was first elected to Congress to represent Georgia's 8th District in 1994. Throughout his legislative career, he's been recognized numerous times by the public and private sectors for work on agriculture, defense, budget, and national security issues. He is now a partner in the Atlanta office of DLA Piper. Senator Chambliss, welcome. Deborah Roberts is an award-winning ABC News correspondent and co-anchor of the prestigious news magazine 2020. She also serves as the substitute anchor for Good Morning America, as well as a guest host on The View. A media veteran, Roberts has traveled the world for her reporting. Her in-depth coverage of current events has earned her a Peabody Award for the 2020 special Say Her Name, Breonna Taylor. She's been awarded multiple Emmy Awards for international and national coverage of world events, including the AIDS crisis in Africa and maternal mortality in Bangladesh. Please welcome our distinguished speakers to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. How exciting to be here basking in the red and black glow. And also the glow of all the smiles after that big win on Saturday night. So it is an honor and a privilege again to be back at my alma mater, and of course a privilege to be here for this very critical and important discussion. I think all of us would have to agree that there's no time like the present, and this is something that we really do need to talk about. You've heard all the accolades about Senator Isakson, whom I did not have an opportunity to know, but after meeting his family members, I feel like I do. And as I said to John earlier, what a legacy for your father to actually have this, to actually move forward, hopefully help our country move forward. So what a legacy I think that we are all building here with this second symposium. So thank you all so much for being here. As you heard, he had a reputation for reaching across the aisle, political civility, something that defined his life. And our two guests here also have that same reputation, Senator Heitkamp and Senator Chambliss. So it's such a pleasure to be here with both of you today. As a Democrat, of course, you reached across the aisle to Republicans and gained great respect. As a Republican, same with you, Senator Chambliss. And I want to talk about your careers in a minute, but I first want to hear about your impressions of Senator Isakson. I know you said, Senator, you dropped whatever you were doing to be here today because you really love Johnny that much. And I heard his granddaughter describe him as Pops, and so many wonderful things about him. So give us some of your impressions, if you would, about the late senator.
Well, it's so fascinating because I think, you know, when you're new to Washington, which I was, most of my political career was in state government, and coming into Washington, the names that you would recognize, and you're a little awestruck. And then there's the people who, the minute you meet, you know they are quality human beings. You know that they will be your friend for life and that they will always have your back, and they're the most trustworthy colleagues you can have. They would never do anything that would in any way, you know, betray your trust in them. And so Johnny was that person. And I think it was so fascinating that you've named this conference as a conference on political civility. Because if, I will tell you this honestly, if you went to the United States Senate with anybody who served with Johnny, and you said, okay, we're going to do this conference on political civility, and we're going to name it after one senator that you can think of, it would be unanimous. There would be no dissent, because that was his reputation. His reputation as a friend, his reputation as a colleague, but mainly as a statesman. And I think we get lost in all the personal relationships, but his ability to do the right thing in really tough times. And I can give you an example, I probably won't, of colleagues of mine, friends of mine on the Democratic side, where maybe they got in a little jam, maybe there was a political back and forth, and Johnny came to the rescue when it was the right thing to do. And that takes political courage. That takes a sense of who you are as a person. And so I would tell you, I would have walked over cut glass to get here, to honor Diane and Johnny and your family. Diane, what a lovely family you have. But because this topic is so important, and right now I'm at the University of Chicago running the Institute of Politics, which is a lot like this. You bring students in and you have a conversation with students about what kind of leader they want to be in that next generation. And every time I think about who should I tell them to emulate? Who should I tell them could get things done, but get things done in a way that he never compromised his integrity? And I would tell you that is your former Senator, Johnny Isakson. That is your former husband, your grandpa, and your dad. I just want you to understand what a legacy he leaves and what a spot in all of our hearts is missing with you with his untimely passing. And so thank you so much for letting me be part of this, Diane, and the rest of the family, and for the University of Georgia, thank you so much for your incredible hospitality.
What a beautiful testimonial. How about you, Senators?
Well, Deborah, I come in a different perspective than anybody in this room when it comes to Johnny. In the fall of 1962, 62 years ago, Johnny and I entered the University of Georgia together. And we were both in the Greek system. He joined SA, but I was Sigma Chi. But back in those days, the Greek system was pretty small. So you knew pretty much everybody in the sororities and the fraternities. So I met Johnny early on in my career at the University of Georgia. And he, on Monday night and Tuesday nights, we would go to Bible study in the library. Wednesday night was hump night. And that means we're over the hump for the week. And that's when the kegs came out. And Chuck Knapp, I understand is here. I'm sorry, Chuck. But I got to know this guy in a special way. And we had great times at the University of Georgia. And Johnny was always a big man on campus. He was interfraternity president, council president, president of SAE and whatever. And as my wife used to introduce the two of us together, she'd always introduce Johnny in glowing words, and she would say that Saxby was the guy that nobody ever thought he would be here. But Johnny truly was. He was just an exceptional individual as well as a student back in those days. Johnny, we kind of drifted apart because he was in Marietta and I was in Moultrie practicing law, and he was building his Northside Realty Company, and he and Diane were having these wonderful children, and obviously I was doing the same thing. But we got back together, interestingly enough, because of politics. When Johnny decided to run for governor in 1990, he called me up, and we had a mutual friend named Willard Laster who was Mr. Republican in Colquitt County. And he said, I want to come down and have a fundraiser and meet some people. Well, Colquitt County was dog dead blue. We didn't have any Republicans ever on the ballot in those days. And so we said, well, Johnny, come on down, and we want to meet you, we'll let you meet some folks down here. And he did. At the end of the day, Johnny Isakson won Colquitt County. In 1990, he's the first Republican to carry that county. It has been red ever since, thanks to Johnny Isakson. And it was his magnetic personality, his charisma, it was his straight talking that impressed everybody early on, and he never wavered from that. It was just such a pleasure that ultimately I was in the Senate and got elected in 2002. Johnny got elected in 2004. We were pretty much inseparable for the 10 years together in the Senate. We talked 4 or 5 times a day, just about what's going on, not just what we were doing that day. And our staffs were really, they permeated down into the staffs, the relationship that we had. And it was unusual to have 2 senators who really liked each other, number one, and openly, but we really did. And our staffs acted the same way. For example, when we have a federal grant of millions of dollars that the federal government was going to issue to the state of Georgia or something, senators usually would fight over to get the first press release. Johnny and I issued joint press releases on anything like that, and it was extremely unusual. But that's the kind of guy that he was, and it was a pleasure to get obviously to work very closely with him on a day-to-day basis, particularly after the many years that we spent together getting there. And there is not a day today that somewhere during the day I think about Johnny. Whether it's a complicated issue that if he were there, he would make it simple, or if it's just having a beer or going to a football game. He was a special person, and needless to say, a great member of the United States Senate.
His memory is clearly so enduring and still emotionally evoking for both of you. Let's talk a little bit about getting into the world of where we are now based on your relationships. When I was in school here at the University of Georgia, Ronald Reagan was president, and I still remember vividly those pictures of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan going out for a drink at the end of the day, even though they were at opposite political ends. And it was sort of a sign of what it is to build bridges and also to be politically civil toward each other. So let me ask you, Senator Heitkamp, when you look back at your careers, I mean, you've worked with Republicans on a number of different issues on behalf of farmers, on behalf of sex trafficking, and fighting sex trafficking, as we talked about. Talk about building those relationships, because it almost seems like this is certainly in such short supply right now, the notion of building those relationships. You and some of these other senators that you've worked with. Talk about building those relationships.
Yeah, I think they come out of 2 things. Number one, trust. You have to trust the people that you're working with. And if you said, what is the virtue that I think is in short supply? It's trust. Because you have to know that when the going gets tough, someone will have your back. That if you're going to be working on compromises, you're going to anger either the far left or you're going to anger the far right. And so as you're forging these compromises and someone says, don't worry, I can deliver 10 votes on the other side, you have to have that trust. And then you have to have a mutual passion. You know, Johnny's passion was veterans. And I will tell you, the other senator who would have walked over cut glass to be here is John Tester. He and Johnny had a very special relationship, but it was built first out of trust of each other. They knew that there were no surprises in committee. They knew that if you wanted to move a bill, you know, I may not agree with you, but, you know, trust that I am not going to get in your way. You got to go work your own deal here. And they built that trust for the benefit of something that they both cared deeply about, which was veterans and veteran services. And so what I would say is there are plenty of people in Washington that you can't trust. I mean, there's the old famous saying, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog, right? And that's because there's gotten to be so much competition. And the competition isn't for the benefit of the public. It's not competition for the benefit of the country. It's competition for the benefit of personal advancement. And it's a matter of who can get ahead and how can I make myself look better. I do want to say this because Saxby said it, but you really need to hear it again. The kind of relationship he's talking about with a colleague, even one on the same side, is incredibly rare. It's incredibly rare not to have that competition, and it's built on trust. It's built on friendship, but it's built on a mutual sense of how do you advance a good idea. When I got to Washington, I would go to my colleagues on the Democratic side and I'd say, what if we did this? And they'd go, oh, that's really a good idea. Well, I said, okay, let's do it. Oh, you don't understand how things work here. There's no such thing as advancing a good idea. A good idea can't find its way simply because it's a good idea. And that I would say is because we've lost the trust in each other and we've stopped being trustworthy. And it's not that we're all suspicious, it's that we've all been burned at one point or another. And so the secret sauce of Johnny Isakson is you could take his word to the bank. He would never break his word. He would never undermine you for his own personal benefit. That's not who he was. And if we had a whole Senate and a whole Congress full of people who just started with that guiding principle, think of what we could get done with a good idea, with compromise, with the kind of values. But I would say, what I think is the two most important ingredients of a successful career in public life, and even today, it is trust and a passion for what you're doing and a belief in the value of what you're doing for the benefit of the American people.
But Senator Chambliss, in this time of polarizing toxicity where it's almost considered a betrayal to work with someone else, I mean, even Speaker Johnson gets a lot of, grief when he tries to work with the Democrats to solve something. Talk to folks out here who are not only interested in this, but are voters. I mean, how do we get to a point where we start to have people like that in Congress? Because I've heard people say, like, where are we going to find people again who are worthy of voting for? Where do we get to the point where we can build these relationships of trust again? How worried are you about that?
Yeah, well, I was in D.C. Last week participating in the Senate orientation. We actually talked a little bit about that. One of the failings of Congress over the last several years is nothing that we can say is a silver bullet that caused it, but we have always subscribed at doing the committee work before bills ever get to the floor. Unfortunately, we have started now over the last several years to bypass the committee structure. Heidi and I were on the Ag Committee together. My state, it was back in those days, tobacco, peanuts, and cotton. Her state is wheat, corn, soybeans. But I really cared a lot about her farmers because if her farmers are going to be successful, my farmers are going to be successful because she really cared about my programs. Unfortunately, and we would go through, we'd have five-year farm bills. We're going through a farm bill again right now, matter of fact. And when we argued about the farm bill, it was in a spirit of we're going to get there, and we're going to have enough money to do the right thing in the commodities. We're going to do the right thing in conservation, research. We all cared about that within the committee, so that when we would get to the floor and arguing, debating about a bill called the Farm Bill, we had Republicans and Democrats saying the same thing. because we were in one accord. Now, we just don't see that. I was fortunate to be on both the Intel Committee and the Armed Services Committee for all my 20 years up there. And those two committees, likewise, we were very of same mind as Republicans and Democrats. We may argue about some weapon system. I wanted to go, a plant going to the state of Georgia, and John Warner might have wanted to go to Virginia. We could argue about that, but at the end of the day, we cared about what's in the best interest of the United States, and we're having some of that lost, and we got to figure out a way. And I do know that the new leadership on the Senate side and Speaker Johnson is relatively new. I know he's of the same mind that we've got to make some changes to get back to work into that structure to involve everybody. And Republicans and Democrats will work together if they have the opportunity inside those committee structures.
Is the key then for voters to think about that when they're voting, to vote people out who don't seem to want to have civility and to work together? Is that what voters need to do? Because you say we need to get to that point, but how do we get to that point if there are folks in Congress who don't want to work together?
Well, the voters are smarter than what politicians ever give them
The credit for.
credit. And they figure out the right people that are going to do the right thing for the country. I think a lot of that we exhibited in the last election. You know, we all saw the ads on TV, and thank goodness now I just could watch the football game Saturday night.
They're
without
over.
Both sides blaring at me. But I think voters are pretty darn smart, and people always ask me, said, are you in favor of term limits? When I got elected in 1994, we had a document called the Contract with America. One of the 10 items in that platform was term limits. And I subscribed to that until I got to Congress. And I realized that these guys that had been there for years, we could not function without their institutional knowledge and their experience. And there's a time when term limits might be appropriate, but the voters are smart enough to know that when that time happens.
Yeah, I think you have to think about how we select candidates, not just what happens in the general election. Because by the time the general election rolls around, you got two choices. And America typically says, I don't like either one of these guys. I don't like that, because typically in primaries, only about 10% of people vote, or 20% of people vote in primaries, and they tend to be the most active, probably on the right and on the left. And so somebody ends up emerging, or these campaigns end up emerging, where you have two candidates that the middle of the country, the vast majority of people in the center of this country, say don't represent them, so I am going to elect or vote for the least objectionable person. And I think until we start electing people we want to elect, as opposed to voting against somebody but for somebody, they knew when they voted for Johnny that they were voting for a person of character, that they were voting for somebody who got things done for Georgia. But again, the question is, could somebody like Johnny, who was known as a compromiser, make it through a partisan primary? I mean, that's a question I guess you all have to answer here in Georgia.
Does character still matter?
Yeah. When I ran in 2012, I had been Attorney General, had high name ID. Mitt Romney lost the state of North Dakota by 20 points, and I, as a Democrat, was elected to the United States Senate. And I know all the political folks there in the back row go, really? And that's true, because there were people who would split their ticket and vote for a person. Split ticket voting has become essentially non-existent. It happened in this go-around, but only in very narrow margins. And so we've produced now a political system that we need to re-examine how we select candidates. Who can rise to the top? Is it a compromiser who can rise to the top? Do we reward compromise at the top? Think about that. Do we reward that person who has gotten the most hits in social media saying mean things about somebody in a hearing, which Johnny would never do? He wasn't part of the performance wing of the political establishment that has emerged with the growth of social media, but also emerged as a result of low-dollar donors, right? I used to say this, and probably get me in trouble with Elizabeth. People say, well, Elizabeth Warren, said something, and I said, yeah, when she does that, it's like, money, please. And it would just fall from the sky. And so just understand the motivation behind the incivility. It's those viral, lack of civility moments on the right and on the left that drive that hardcore right or left. And so what I would say to offer some hope is that there is always an opportunity in America in this democracy. Claude Pepper, who I don't know if you served with Claude Pepper, but he would say, every 2 years, the American voter grabs the steering wheel of this country, and they turn it one way or they turn it the other way. And I think that there is going to be, for the right examination by the voters, a reward system for people who compromise. And if there isn't, let me tell you, there's people in this country who would be great senators, who would be great congressmen, who will never run. Because as they say, why would I go somewhere to try and make a deal with people who don't want to make a deal?
Yeah.
Going back to what Johnny said. And so I just think that it is incumbent on we the people to reward people who go to Washington to get things done, who want to compromise.
And you are right, and obviously we don't have that much time today, unfortunately, because we could go on and on, but there are names, Senator Tom Tillis that comes up, of people who really seem to be compromising, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. Let's talk about where we are today. I was speaking with some students today at lunch, and there was someone who was sitting with me at the table who is part of a foundation who said there could be like I don't know if you would call it a silver lining, but when you're looking at where we are now and what just happened with this election, and the voters, of course, overwhelmingly spoke about issues that were important to them, the economy and immigration, and you did work on immigration. What do you take out of what we just saw in this election that might point to the possibility of maybe compromise? We certainly know that there was a lot of incivility going into this election, but the voters talked about issues, or certainly voted about issues. So is that a place where we can start to think about compromise, maybe focusing on immigration, a hot button issue right now, focusing on the economy? Is that an opportunity now, Senator, do you think, for Congress to compromise?
After a presidential election, particularly where we have a change, Deborah, there's always opportunity, and clearly we have one today. We've got too many major issues that need to be worked on by Congress. And I say this a lot because I sincerely feel this way. The best legislation that I ever worked on was bipartisan legislation. If you have a piece of legislation that was 100% passed by the Democrats or 100% by the Republicans, that's not going to be the best piece that we could have done. And now, when you think of the issue of immigration, I know that the Trump campaign came down really hard on illegals, and we're not. Nobody in Congress today is in favor of illegals. I promise you, irrespective of the news reports from time to time. But it is a complex issue. And there's so many issues that we have are complex. And it takes the best ideas of Republicans and the best ideas of the Democrats to meld together to come to the right solution. Johnny was a magician in that sphere. When we worked on the immigration issue back in 2007 and 8, and then we tried it again in 2012, Johnny and I were in the room every day with John McCain, Ted Kennedy, other folks on the far right, far left, middle of the road, and we got close, got very close. And unfortunately, we didn't get quite over the line because it would have solved a lot of the problems that we've got today. But I do think that there is an opportunity here, Deborah, to take that issue as an example, that if you get the best ideas of the Democrats and the Republicans together, there is a way to solve it, because it needs to be solved, and hopefully that's what's going to happen.
A subject we've been focused on for a very long time. Unfortunately, we're running
Can
almost
I
out of
just-
time. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I just want to make one comment, which is because Article 1, that is the section of the Constitution that establishes Congress, because the members of the branch of government in Article 1 have failed to produce, that has left a huge opening for executive power. And so Saxby is maybe being a little cheerier than I would be, because I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a continuing creep of executive orders, continuing creep of executive action, and bypassing the Congress. And it is incumbent as the members of Congress who have a responsibility to Article 1 to actually step up. Now, ask me in 130 days whether I think that happened.
That will be very interesting. Well, we're going to have to wrap up because I'm a television person and I believe in actually staying on time. But we do want to give you both like one final thought, if you will, before we wrap up briefly, if you would. Senator Chambliss, I don't know if there's a final thought you want to leave the audience with, and Senator Heitkamp, you too. So.
Well, yeah, when we're talking about what's going to happen in the early days of this administration, Lord knows, do we ever need Johnny over these next several months here, because when I think about the world that these young folks here are going to inherit from our generation, it's the most dangerous world that I can ever remember. We've got so many volcanoes are laying out there just ready to explode. We know what's going on in the Middle East right now. We know that what's happening with respect to China and the threats that are coming out of there. We haven't even talked about North Africa lately, because these other volcanoes are potential blow-ups. So there are a lot of opportunity for true statesmen to step up and not just give rhetoric or to talk the negative on the other side of whatever the issue is, but to say that there are positive ways to solve this and to address it. And if Johnny were here today, I promise you that was what he would be thinking as we sit here today and talk about this type of conversation. It's again, to the family and Jerry and Dean and all the leaders of the Isaac Symposium, thank you for the opportunity for Heidi and I to come and share some thoughts with you tonight, this afternoon. And thanks for your support and your commitment to continuing that legacy beyond. And there will be a lot of things that are good that come out of conversations like this around the country, and Johnny was just so special in being able to get those type of ideas out front.
Totally agree. And briefly, Senator Heitkamp, briefly?
Well, all of that, but mainly want to say in my lifetime, as you kind of think about your life, you think about people who were special, people who enriched you, people who you will remember your entire life. And Johnny Isakson was my friend. He liked me because I had red hair, I think. But he always had a big smile for every person he ever met. He always made people feel worthy and comfortable. And I just hope that we see a new generation of leaders, not like some of the people that we see today, but somebody who have the graciousness and the principles and really the loving attitude of Johnny Isakson. Thank you so much for letting me come and tell some stories about my friend Johnny Isakson.
Well, hopefully this is just the beginning and certainly not the end of conversations about political civility. So thank you all so much. Thank you, senators, and thank you to the University of Georgia for having me here. Back home.
I just wanted to say quickly before introducing our John Isakson for closing remarks that real exemplars bring examples to the table. So thank you for these rich examples. Senator Heitkamp, thank you for talking about trust as part of the secret sauce for political civility and bridge building. And thank you for your comments on shared interests, which I think are so important, Senator Chambliss. And for our moderator, I actually think almost like a therapist. Thank you for unpacking what really matters here, Deborah Roberts. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you. Bravo. Thank you.
So it is my pleasure to introduce you to one of the great sons of Johnny Isakson, John Isakson, for closing remarks. John.
Wow, what a great group. We had a few less people last year, a few more people this year, and I hope that trend continues. I echo the thanks to the speakers and our moderator today and to the University of Georgia on behalf of the family. Thank you, not just for the support and the kind words about Dad, but thank you for giving some momentum to the idea that political civility is not dead and in fact is more needed than ever. Personally, for me, I'd rather go first than last. Following these folks is kind of a tough act to follow. It's hard with Dad being gone to find that sort of North Star and to find the person to follow. But they are out there. They're on this stage. They're in Congress today. They're in the Senate today, and they're running for office. It is our job to find them and to support them so that we don't sit around and say, I wish Johnny was here. We say, I'm glad Tom Tillis is. I'm glad Chris Coons is. I'm glad John Thune is. That's what we need to be saying. And if Dad was here, I think that's what he would want us to do. He would want us to find the person who's here today who can forward his ideas and who can keep this idea going. Because we need political civility. Democracy needs political civility. Society needs political civility. And it is out there. So let's not lose hope. Thank you all for being here.
Great talk. Short and to the point.
Yeah.
Much like college, I was given one assignment and I failed. As a thank you from the University of Georgia for everybody being here, we have a reception outside, and if you are here, you are welcome and invited, and hope we will see everyone out there. So thank you very much.